Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Leviticus chapter 19 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We are looking at what many scholars call the absolute moral core of the entire Tanakh. This single action-packed chapter seamlessly weaves together how to worship, how to farm, how to do business, and exactly how to treat the people around you. It's literally a total blueprint for everyday life.
To make sure we cover every single verse of this incredible chapter without rushing, we've organized this explainer into 6 logical sections. 1. Introduction to holiness. 2. Charity and worship. 3. Loving your neighbor. 4. Statutes of separation. 5. Sanctity and strangers. And finally, 6. Fair dealing and recap.
All right, let's dive right into our first section, Introduction to Holiness, covering verses 1 through 4. Right out of the gate, God commands the entire assembly of Israel to be holy simply because He is holy. Now, the Hebrew word used here in the text is kadosh, which essentially means to be set apart, to be unique, and to be elevated. And I want you to notice verse 2 specifically says, "Speak to the entire assembly of Israel." Think about that. This isn't some private, secret message just for the priests serving behind closed doors in a sanctuary, right? No, it is a very public mandate for every single person. The goal here is direct emulation. The people are tasked with reflecting God's unique elevation, His kadosh, in their own deeply human everyday actions. So where does this kadosh, this holiness, actually start? Well, according to verses 3 and 4, it starts right in your living room. The text commands every person to revere their mother and father, pairs that directly with keeping the Sabbaths, and explicitly forbids turning to idols or making cast metal gods. Right away, we learn something massive. Being holy isn't just an abstract spiritual feeling or some lofty mystical state up in the clouds. It is firmly, solidly grounded in basic household respect, dedicating specific time to rest, and knowing exactly who you are worshiping.
Let's move along to Section 2, Charity and Worship, covering verses 5 through 10.
Okay, verses 5 through 8 lay out a very strict timeline for the peace offering. When you bring a peace offering or a fellowship offering, it is meant to be shared and consumed in a timely manner. The timeline is highly specific. You eat it on the day of sacrifice, and sure, you can finish whatever leftovers there are on day 2. But day 3, that is a non-negotiable boundary. Anything remaining absolutely must be burned in the fire. The text explicitly warns that if you eat it on the 3rd day, it is impure, it will not be accepted, and the person who eats it will literally be cut off from his people. This teaches an incredibly strict discipline and respect for sacred things. You simply cannot treat a holy offering like ordinary Monday night leftovers sitting in the back of your fridge. Moving to verses 9 and 10, we're introduced to the beautiful, practical concepts of pe'ah, which means leaving the corners of your field, and leket, which refers to leaving the fallen gleanings. The text commands that when you reap the harvest of your land, you intentionally do not reap to the very edges of your field, and you don't pick up the fallen grapes in your vineyard. You deliberately leave them for the poor and the alien. Think about how profound this is. This is an incredible system of built-in, mandatory charity. It doesn't rely entirely on your spontaneous move of generosity that day. The edges of your field literally, legally belong to those in need.
Now for Section 3, Loving Your Neighbor, which covers verses 11 through 18.
Verses 11 through 14 demand absolute, strict honesty. We're talking forbidding theft, lying, withholding wages, and prohibiting cruelty to the deaf and the blind. The text explicitly says, do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another. You cannot swear falsely by God's name because doing so would completely profane it. And then it gets incredibly practical in day-to-day life. You cannot hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. You have to pay them daily because they rely on that money to survive right now. And then it outlines these very specific protections for the disabled. It says you must not curse the deaf who cannot hear you, and you must not put a stumbling block in front of the blind who cannot see it. The profound takeaway here is that even if the victim is totally unaware of what you're doing to them, God sees it.
So verse 15 commands absolute fairness in judgment. The text strictly says, do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great. In a legal dispute or a community argument, you must judge your neighbor fairly, based purely on the facts. And let's be honest, it is incredibly human to want to pity the poor in a dispute, right? Or on the flip side, to show reverence and favor to the rich and powerful. But the text doesn't allow for either. It demands that true justice must be entirely blind to social status.
Verses 16 through 18 conclude this whole section by outlawing slander, hatred, and revenge. First, verse 16 says, don't go about spreading slander. And importantly, don't stand idly by if your neighbor's life is in danger. Verse 17 says, "Do not hate your brother in your heart. Instead, frankly rebuke them, so you don't share their guilt." Basically, be direct, don't let it fester. And then it peaks with this massive, famous command in verse 18. "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." It's amazing because all those previous rules about not stealing and paying workers fairly, they all funnel right into this single core foundational principle.
Moving right along, let's hit Section 4, Statutes of Separation, looking at verses 19 through 25.
Verse 19 outlines strict physical boundaries against kila'in, which is the Hebrew term for forbidden mixtures. You are commanded not to let cattle mate with a diverse kind, not to plant a field with mixed seed, and not to wear a garment of mixed wool and linen together. What's going on here? Well, this establishes divine order in the natural world. It visually and physically reminds the people every single day, right down to the clothes on their back, to maintain the distinct categories and boundaries that God has established.
Now, verses 20 through 22 address a very specific legal scenario. If a man sleeps with a bondmaid or slave girl who is designated for another man, but she hasn't been redeemed or given her freedom yet, they are punished but not killed. Because she isn't a fully free woman yet, the text states they are not put to death. However, there is still an inquisition and a due punishment. The man must bring his forfeit, specifically a ram for a guilt offering, to the door of the tent of meeting. The priest makes atonement for him before the Lord, and only then is his sin forgiven. This simple reading shows that actions have real, unavoidable consequences that require formal atonement.
Verses 23 through 25 give us a crystal clear three-step agricultural procedure for fruit trees. When they enter the land and plant any kind of fruit tree, step 1 designates the fruit as orla, which literally means uncircumcised or forbidden. For the first 3 years, it absolutely must not be eaten. Step 2, in the 4th year, every bit of its fruit is a holy offering of praise to the Lord. You still don't eat it yourself. Finally, step 3, in the 5th year, you are actually allowed to eat the fruit. By following this strict practice of patience and dedication, the text promises your harvest will ultimately be increased.
Okay, Section 5, Sanctity and Strangers, covering verses 26 through 34.
Verses 26 through 31 firmly separate the Israelites from surrounding nations by outlawing customs associated with idolatry. The text lays it out clearly. Do not eat any meat with the blood still in it. You are strictly forbidden to practice divination or sorcery. Do not clip the edges of your beard or cut the hair at the sides of your head. It specifically forbids making cuts in your flesh for the dead or putting tattoo marks on yourselves. Furthermore, it says do not degrade your daughter by making her a prostitute, preventing the land from falling into complete wickedness. And it says strictly avoid seeking out mediums or ghosts, which will spiritually defile you. These boundaries existed to clearly and visibly separate the assembly from Canaanite and Egyptian practices.
Then we get to verse 32, which commands rising for the aged. The literal text commands, rise in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God. By physically standing up when an older person enters the room, you are tangibly showing respect for their age and their life experience. Today, this practical life lesson easily translates to actively honoring, caring for, and actually listening to the wisdom of older generations in our communities.
A bit earlier in the chapter, the text said to love your neighbor. Here, in verses 33 and 34, it takes it an extraordinary step further. Love the stranger, the alien, the immigrant, exactly the same way. The text literally says, when an alien lives with you in your land, do not ill-treat him. The alien living with you must be treated as one of your native born. Love him as yourself. Why? Because you know exactly what it feels like to be an outsider. Empathy is commanded here based on their own historical, undeniable experience of being aliens themselves in Egypt.
Finally, Section 6, Fair Dealing and Recap, covering our final verses 35 to 37.
Verses 35 and 36 mandate complete honesty in commerce. You absolutely must use accurate, standardized weights and measures. Specifically, the text calls for an honest ephah, which was a standard ancient dry measure for things like grain, and an honest hin, which was a liquid measure for things like oil or wine. If your weights are secretly rigged to cheat your customers, you are committing a sin. But more than that, you are profaning the entire system of holiness God established when He brought you out of Egypt.
And that brings us to verse 37, which commands the keeping of all these decrees. The final verse simply states, "Keep all my decrees and all my laws and follow them. I am the Lord." This single chapter really does cover it all, doesn't it? Our worship teaches us to dedicate offerings properly.
Charity shows us how to intentionally leave resources for the vulnerable. Ethics demands we deal honestly in business and judge fairly in disputes. And boundaries require us to keep the separation statutes in our daily lives.
Before we wrap up this session, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. How does keeping these meticulous, step-by-step boundaries actually make us holier in our daily routines? We so often think of holiness as something abstract, purely spiritual, or confined to a religious building somewhere. But Leviticus 19 flips that entirely on its head, showing us that true holiness is forged in the dirt of the fields, in the arguments of the courtroom, and in the hustle of the marketplace.
Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.